Hey guys, welcome to the Friday mini show. Got a whole bunch of stuff to get through. Ryan Grimm, great to see you, my friend.
Nice to see you.
So we are hoping that our right-wing friend Emily Jashinsky is going to join us for some of the latter topics here. In particular, we're going to get into the Jeffrey Epstein, the big release of the files, which there's
Yes.
quite a bit of MAGA pushback on how all of that went down, which is quite amusing, Ryan. I like that one.
Yes, and we have about 10 or 20 minutes to cram in as much leftist propaganda as we can until she comes in and checks us. And later today, we're going to be posting our interview with former CFPB director Rohit Chopra. Emily couldn't join that. Not she had a flight she had to catch, so it's just me and Rohit. But I played for him the Mark Zuckerberg comments on Rogan, the Mark Andreessen comments, the Jamie Dimon calling him an arrogant, out of touch SOB, and had him respond to all of those different charges. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, what were kind of the big takeaways there? Because I haven't gotten a chance to watch it yet either. And that was one of the clearest examples to me, and you called it out immediately, of how these oligarchs, the Andreessens of the world and the Zuckerbergs of the world, were trying to use a fake culture war agenda to trick people into supporting what is just a blatantly pro-oligarch agenda. And one of the things we actually have in the show is some of the CFPB enforcements that have now been rolled back now that that agency is just completely gutted.
I think it's just really interesting for people to hear precisely what the CFPB was doing that got these people upset. And for instance, when the White House basically tried to get rid of the CFPB, they put out a statement that listed 6-7 things that they objected to and included links to stories. So I went through it with Chopra. All right, they say you try to enforce price controls on banks. Click through the link, what is this? And he's like, oh, that's our overdraft rule that said you can't illegally shuffle around people's payments so that they get 5 overdrafts rather than 1. And the White House calls that price controls. So
so dishonest.
I wish every person in the country will watch this interview.
Well, maybe they will. You never know. I'll go ahead and pull this up. This was an element I had for later, along with we've got a whole bunch of updates on DOGE. We've got some court pushback on DOGE that's really significant. But I mean, this is what the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was doing. They had these different enforcement actions against Capital One, against Berkshire Hathaway-owned Vanderbilt Mortgage and Finance, against a predatory student loan company. And now all of that is just being completely dropped and going away. So, and of course, it's no mistake, no accident that Elon Musk had just signed a deal with Visa. He wants to turn Twitter into one of these payment processors as well and be the quote-unquote everything app. They would have fallen under CFPB regulatory jurisdiction.
Yeah.
And now the CFPB basically doesn't exist anymore. So they have more of a free hand to scam people and do some of the things like what Sam Bankman-Fried was rightfully, convicted and thrown in prison for doing.
Yeah, and Zuckerberg went on Rogan and was like, I don't understand why this agency would come after us. We have nothing to do with any finance or financial institution behavior. And Rohit pointed out, just 5 years ago, they launched their own currency called Libra. Are we supposed to pretend that never happened?
The thing that was to me the most insulting was Zuckerberg pretending I don't even know what this agency is.
I don't even know the name of the thing.
Dude, shut the fuck up.
Yes.
Stop playing dumb. And Rogan just going along with all of it was really sad to see as well. But in any case.
Hope he watches it too.
Yeah, he actually just recorded a big, long interview apparently with Elon, so that's going to be interesting as well. We'll stay tuned
Looking forward to that.
Yeah, for what comes down of that one. But let's go ahead and jump into the latest with DOGE, just to give a sketch of what we're going to try to get through this morning. We've got all the DOGE updates, the court orders, the latest in terms of the cuts, going after the weather service and those sorts of things. That's a really significant one right now. We've also got all of the Epstein melee from yesterday and MAGA freak out over that. And related to that, I would say also the Tate brothers making their way to the U.S. and actually some MAGA pushback over that as well. But it looks very much like the Trump administration intervened to get these alleged rapists and sex traffickers to be able to travel to the United States. So, you've got a lot of sex trafficker, rapist stories here relevant to the day. And we've saved those for later in the show. We're hoping Emily's going to be able to join because we want to get a perspective from the right about how all of this stuff is landing. But let me go ahead and jump in with this. So a couple of significant court orders coming down. This one in particular, the most noteworthy. So a judge has blocked the Trump administration's mass firings of federal workers. This pertains to, you guys know how they just came in and said, okay, everybody who is still on probationary status, that's it, you're gone. And, that's mostly people who are new on the job, but also, as Ryan pointed out previously, it's also people who just got promotions. So you're talking about a lot of individuals who actually were the most successful and the most significant within their organizations. One other thing I learned too, Ryan, is, we have all these programs for military spouses who, of course, are having to pick up and move around the country all the time based on where their husband or wife is being deployed. And so they would more frequently than your average employee find themselves in a probationary status because of having to pick up and move around the country and job hop more often than your average employee. So they also were tremendously hit hard by this. Let me just read a little bit of this article. And then
before you do that, I have to offer one clarification. The probationary period applies to when you move from into management, or if you get a promotion or a lateral movement from one agency to another, or one sub-agency to another sub-agency. If you just get a raise from one year to the next, like that doesn't kick you back into the probationary period. And the best interpretation of when your probationary period in management, they can't actually fire you from that. They would push you back down into worker status out of management. But lots of people do move from agency to agency or get detailed and then come back, and so those would all be caught up. So it's not complete blanket anybody who got promoted, which is what I implied on the show. So I wanted to kind of correct that.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay, so here is what the Washington Post is reporting. A federal judge on Thursday ordered the Office of Personnel Management to rescind directives that initiated the mass firing of probationary workers across the government, ruling that the terminations were probably illegal, as a group of labor unions argued in court. U.S. District Judge William Alsup ordered OPM to rescind its previous directives to more than 24 agencies, including the Department of Defense, which I think is the largest employer of civilians across the government. So really significant here. The ruling, a temporary restraint on the government, will be revisited in the coming weeks. It's one of the biggest roadblocks so far to Trump's effort to slash the federal workforce. Here's some of the language from the judge. They say Congress has given the authority to hire and fire to the agencies themselves. The Department of Defense, for example, has statutory authority to hire and fire. The Office of Personnel Management does not have any authority whatsoever under any statute in the history of the universe to hire and fire employees at another agency. They can hire and fire their own employees. The article goes on to explain, Ryan, that even though this is a significant ruling, but not a final decision, unclear how soon this is going to result in any sort of tangible benefits for those federal government workers who have been fired as, part of this effort to axe all the probationary employees from the government. This pertained to one specific civilian employee who, was part of this hearing. So hard to say when or how this is going to ultimately be implemented, but, a significant move forward for those who are trying to fight back against the mass cuts and especially mass firings at the federal government.
Yeah, and in a sense, it's a process technicality in the sense that if today the Department of Defense itself sends out emails to all of these people, well, I don't even know, their emails don't work anymore, but they have to find them somehow and send them a letter saying, I'm writing you from the Department of Defense and you are fired. And they've also started changing the wording of how they've done these firings to try to, get them closer to legal. Out of the gate, they were saying, you are fired because your skills and your performance, don't match the needs that we currently have. And so lots of federal workers then were like, well, I just had my performance review and I got I got gold stars and all the flowers you could ask for. And so now they have said, basically a kind of a reorganization type of language, like, it's not you, it's us. It's not you, it's me. We don't need you around anymore. It's not about your performance. Now they'd have to do that new language and send it directly from if it's NOAA, then NOAA would have to do the firing. And so then a judge might say, okay, well, this was improper, but now it's moot. So you're still fired.
Yeah. Well, and I also saw as part of their arguments here, the government is changing their tune. Originally they were saying at all these agencies, you have to fire all of your probationary employees. And now it was really a recommendation. And then the agencies are taking it upon themselves to fire all of these employees, because that gets around, what the judge said here is like, there is no statute anywhere. I think they said in the history of the universe that says OPM can just come in and fire all of these staff across all of these agencies. They're responsible for their own employees. They can fire whoever they want there, but you can't come in and whole of government mandate the Defense Department and everybody else to fire all of these employees. So the government is trying to get a little cute here. And, this was just a strong recommendation, but we weren't really mandating it. So we'll see if that changes anything.
Yeah, it would be like NOAA trying to fire people at the Pentagon.
Right.
And be like, no, you can't do that.
You can't do that. Yeah. Well, and Bernie Sanders made a point that was pretty relevant to this, and it's one that I've been making for a while now, not as well as Bernie Sanders, of course, but or not as virally, certainly as Bernie Sanders. But, all of these Senate-confirmed agency heads now are totally irrelevant. Like, they don't matter much at all at this point, because if some DOGE kid says, we're going to let go of this many people and we're going to close your office and we're going to gut this program, they're the ones who have the final say. And you've been making the great point, Ryan, about, at the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, issued these waivers for PEPFAR saying, no, this funding is going to continue. And DOGE is basically like, no, it's not. And it's DOGE that ends up having the final word here. So Bernie was making a similar point about how just completely stripped of power these agency heads are and how irrelevant. Let's go ahead and take a listen to the way he phrased this on the Senate floor.
Today, we are not voting on who the next Secretary of Labor is. The next Secretary of Labor, the next Secretary of Education, the next Secretary of Housing, the next Secretary of the Treasury is Elon Musk. And let us understand that reality and not play along with the charade. Does anyone here really think that any Secretary of Labor, any Secretary of Education is going to make decisions by himself or herself? Just yesterday, the President held a meeting with his cabinet. And who was the star of the meeting? Was it the Secretary of Defense? The Secretary of State? No, it was an unelected official, happens to be the wealthiest person on earth. It was Elon Musk. And at that meeting, President Trump asked his cabinet, is anybody unhappy with Elon? Well, if you are, we'll throw them out of here, end of quote. In other words, if any cabinet official has the courage to stand up to Mr. Musk and disobey his edicts, they are gone. So, Mr. Chairman, my request to you is a simple one. Let's be honest. The American people understand it. And it's time that we understood it as well. If you want to discuss policies in the Department of Labor, let's bring in the real secretary. Chairman, I respectfully request that this committee bring Elon Musk before this committee so that we can really hear what's going on with the government.
What'd you make of that moment, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, fair point. If he wants to run the show, he should be the one that
answers the questions.
Is accountable to the public and accountable to our elected bodies. And to the point that we were talking about earlier about them trying to make it more legal, Russ Vought sent out a memo yesterday to a lot of government, senior government officials that was forwarded to me. And there's one key line I can read to you here that shows the way that they're kind of tweaking their language to try to make it legal. They say, he says, quote, pursuant to the president's direction, agencies should focus on the maximum elimination of functions that are not statutorily mandated while driving the highest quality, most efficient delivery of their statutorily required functions. So what they're going to argue is that Congress requires the EPA or NOAA or whatever to do this thing, and we are going to do our best to do that thing that you say you're going to do. They don't require us to do these things by statute, and so we're getting rid of them all. And just because we're getting rid of a lot of what we're statutorily required to do doesn't mean we're not going to still do the mission of it. So it's sidestepping the unitary executive theory because it's saying no, we're doing what you want. Don't worry, we're just doing it cheaper and better, which is like nobody would argue that you can't do that. So then the question would be, well, is that what you're actually doing, or are you just putting this in a memo so you can share it with the judge?
Well, and I think we already have the answer to that when you look at USAID being the most clear-cut example. I mean, that agency has been destroyed, and it is, by law, an independent agency authorized by Congress through multiple successive legislative efforts. And so it is, it is not legal to just destroy an agency, or even just to take the key parts of it and subsume it under the State Department would require congressional legislation. So, in some of these agencies, maybe technically they're complying with what Congress, authorized and demanded of this agency. But we know certain examples that is definitely not the case.
Yeah, I think some of the genius of the moves that they're making now, evil genius maybe, is that it makes us sound like hall monitors, where we're like, well, hold on, flipping over the board and reading the rules. Mm-hmm. And saying, you can't do that. That's not how, that's not how you're supposed to get rid of USAID. Even while we have been very critical of lots of what USAID does, and they can take it isn't higher ground necessarily, but it's different ground where they're like, screw you. Like the people are sick of this stuff. We're getting rid of it, and you're the ones that are standing in the way of it. And it kind of flips the whole argument about the Constitution and the Republic on its head, because Democrats are so used to Republicans being the ones that insist upon every word of the Constitution being honored faithfully. Mm-hmm. So then it's like whiplash to be like, oh, Article 1 doesn't matter. Never mind. Article 1, it's like a big part of it. It's the first one, and it's a huge chunk of it. It's like, oh, guess.
I think if it had stayed in the realm of USAID, I think that argument probably, has more traction.
That's a good...
Although even there, people are not cruel. They don't want to deny. That's why there was a backlash
and
over
the
the
Ebola
AIDS
thing
funding.
Is embarrassing.
And
perhaps
they have
dangerous.
And by the way, they have not restarted Ebola prevention funding. And so these things, even though, this might be in Africa now, we all know from very recent experience, it doesn't stay in Africa. So,
they have planes that can fly right here.
Yeah. So
there are planes landing.
When you ask people like, should the government be more efficient? Should we spend less on foreign aid? They're like, sure. When it's like, should we deny life-saving medication to babies born with HIV living in an orphanage? It's like, no, what's wrong with you? Of course not. But again, to the point, it's obviously gotten way beyond just USAID at this point. I mean, I could go ahead and pull this up, actually. They're planning on slashing half of the Social Security Administration. Mm-hmm. And some of the headlines that are coming out in towns like local cities around the country really do underscore how the federal government is not just something that exists among like hippie liberals in DC with Ukraine flags in their bios. These are headlines from Green Bay and from, in Michigan and in Birmingham, Social Security, Las Vegas, Social Security offices that are slated for closure as part of these cuts. We've seen the impact to the National Park Service already. Obviously, this pairs too with the budget resolution that just passed through the House with every single Republican, save for one, voting for it, that's going to attack Medicaid. And so I think there's a very clear picture that's emerging for people. And you see this, in the way the poll numbers have moved as well, where it's like one billionaire has taken control of the government and is running it for the benefit of him and his buddies, and is slash any program that may benefit you or anything that the government does that you like, or like maybe air traffic safety as one example, that's getting slashed while a bunch of billionaires are getting tax cuts. So even though the hall monitor thing, like I hear you there, but I think we've gone way beyond that at this point.
Right. The higher level response to that is like, you guys, people voted for you because they think rent is too high, interest rates are too high, egg prices are too high, and you're closing the Social Security office in the town.
Yes.
Which people need the Social Security office open for obvious reasons. And they'll say, well, if we close the Social Security office, then we'll save money and eventually interest rates will go down as a result of that. Like that is the most broken kind of slow way that you could ever try to do monetary policy, by just firing a bunch of NOAA workers like that. You're not being serious about where the federal government spends money.
Correct.
It's not Social Security staffers in Alabama or Wisconsin or Michigan.
Well,
that's not moving the needle on interest rates.
Especially when you're pairing that with $4 trillion tax cuts for the rich.
Right.
Like, you're not clearly you're not serious about deficit reduction. The only person who was actually serious about it was Thomas Massey, who voted against the bill because he was like, it blows up the debt and the deficit.
Right. You also wouldn't gut the IRS.
Correct. Yes, because every dollar you spend at the IRS is returned. By the way,
right.
I mean, CFPB, again, if you're talking about like efficiency and all that was one of the best agencies in terms of return on investment for the dollars that are invested there. So, I mean, causing pain and misery among the federal government workforce is not going to do a damn thing. If you fired every single federal government worker, it is like a relatively small proportion of the federal government budget. Mm-hmm. So, this is clearly not about cutting debt, cutting deficit, cutting the fat. It's about consolidation of power and an ideological agenda. I mean, you are more of a history buff than I am, but, it seems like there's some parallels here with like, Mao's Cultural Revolution and the purges of the bureaucracy, in that era is kind of what I would say, sort of analogous.
Scapegoating people rather than having the courage to go after where the real money is. Like you want to save $1 trillion, go after the F-35 program or whatever. Maybe I don't know if it's $1 trillion. It's an enormous amount of money that we've spent on this jet that we don't need. We got drones.
Yeah,
just get rid of that. But you won't go after that because that's where your money comes from.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So here's one more legal decision that came down that could be significant. A judge has ordered some Trump administration officials, at least one DOGE staffer, to have to sit for depositions in a lawsuit over the group's access to sensitive government systems. The judge involved here called DOGE's activities opaque. I believe they're limited to 8 hours of deposed testimony from these staffers that are involved here. And this could be significant, because it has been completely opaque. We've had to rely on whistleblowers from within these various agencies and some intrepid reporting from a whole range of people, both kind of your traditional media types like Jeff Stein, but also some who are more independent media, to try to figure out what they're even up to in there. And there's still a lot of unanswered questions. So could be some interesting things that come out of those depositions. So it's something to keep an eye on. Yeah.
If we ever get them, they're going to have some wins too in the courts.
Yes.
And we'll see.
Yeah, they will. They certainly will. I think especially when they get up to the Supreme Court, given the ideological valence there. We've mentioned NOAA a couple times, and this is one of the more significant cuts that's moving forward. It's also one that was significantly signaled in Project 2025. They are mass firing upwards of 1,800 workers at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, including top climate scientists and weather forecasters. The firings reportedly include workers at the National Weather Service. And as I mentioned, and Ryan, you may know more about this has been kind of an ideological project of the Rust vote right. Mm-hmm. And in Project 2025, first of all, they hate NOAA because they are honest about climate change, so they don't like that. And then they also, right now, anyone, including there's some weather YouTubers who have gotten really big, but your local weather forecaster, anyone can access the data and resources of the National Weather Service. And obviously that's really important because we're having increasingly extreme and increasingly regular climate catastrophes. And the right, led by Rust Vote and Project 2025, et cetera, they have long wanted to effectively privatize that function so that people have to pay in order to get that kind of research. And it's stripped of anything that might indicate that, the climate crisis is fueling these things and any of the research that indicates what direction the climate crisis might take.
Right. It's for them. And actually, honestly, you could call it's socialism. Like the public comes together and collectively funds something that we all believe that we need, which is some forecast about what the weather is going to be like, both extreme events and regular events. And we make fun of the weatherman for getting things wrong, but the apps on our phone are pretty good. Mm-hmm. Like if you think about it, they tell you what it's going to be. They're nailing it pretty often, and people find it very helpful. You've got free access all the time to this pretty accurate data, and they take for granted that some people take for granted that just comes from the sky, but it has to get filtered through a bunch of scientists who have training their whole lives to figure this stuff out and then pump it out to us for free. And you're right, AccuWeather and these other places want to just monopolize it so they can charge you for it. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it'll be a much crappier service because they are getting rid of the people who know how to do it.
Right. And this is one of those things where, it requires a significant scale to be able to do it well and to be able to predict things effectively in, every part of what is a large and vast country, et cetera. So, yeah, you'll be paying more and you will be getting less. There were, I wanted to show two different people.
One knock-on effect this could have, insurance companies are getting freaked out at a lack of access to data.
True.
And then if insurance companies are in doubt, they're just going to raise rates. Like they're not your friend.
Right. Yes.
So, we're shoot ourselves in a couple of feet this way.
So I wanted to show a kind of like traditional weather person, and also I think the biggest YouTube weather guy, Ryan Hall. Al Roker weighed in and said, going into the severe weather and hurricane season, this cannot be good. Commerce Department has laid off hundreds of NOAA employees, many with specialized skills, who work at one of the world's top climate science and weather forecasting agencies. Why It Matters, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, responsible for providing weather watches and warnings, monitoring, studying Earth climate, as well as operating weather satellites and protecting marine life. The layoffs of probationary employees that began Thursday hit soon after cuts at the behest of Elon Musk's DOGE occurred at other climate and environment agencies. The big picture, NOAA's missions require staff to work around the clock to monitor dangerous weather, earthquakes that could cause tsunamis and other hazards. He goes on to note that just in the past several weeks, they've been essential. I mean, one of the stories that I've been covering is the fact that, there were these horrific floods in Appalachia across parts of Virginia, West Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Historic levels of devastation. First of all, it took Trump almost 2 weeks to declare a state of emergency in West Virginia, which is just completely unforgivable. And, if it had been Biden on the other side, it would have been a total freak out from the right. How could you abandon these people, et cetera, et cetera. But, it really is a sort of coordinated attack, not only on NOAA, but also on FEMA. Trump has said he wants to dismantle and send it to the states. A state like West Virginia, it's a poor, small state, is not going to have the ability to respond on their own. But in any case, Al Roker pointing out there that the regularity of these events, now you say it's, what was once a 100-year flood seems to be happening, once every 5 years, once every decade with increasing regularity, all because of the, escalating climate crisis.
Right. Federal emergency management is one of the most obvious things you would want federalized.
Yeah.
Like, if a small poor state like West Virginia could do it on its own, they would.
Right.
They can't.
Yeah. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And, and actually it will be, not that it matters whether it's Trump voters or Democratic voters or whatever, but it will be more red states that are harder hit. Because states like California and New York, they still need federal government help, but they will be more able to respond. They have more resources than a state like, West Virginia or, Mississippi and Alabama, also Louisiana, often hard hit by hurricanes as well.
Arkansas, Oklahoma, they all get whacked.
That's exactly right. Tornadoes. So, this is one that is important for literally everyone in the country. This is the YouTuber I was mentioning, Ryan Hall. He says this is devastating news. Today's reported layoffs at the NWS will impact our ability to keep Americans safe from extreme weather. These forecasters are essential frontline workers who save lives during hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods. Cutting these meteorologists isn't just short-sighted, it is dangerous. And I think that's, that almost goes without saying, or it should go without saying.
It's very similar to cutting Ebola funding. And they cut it. The Ebola outbreak was declared January 28th or something, and to be pausing Ebola prevention funding at that moment is absurd. And he claimed, "Oh, we kicked it back up very quickly." That appears, like you said, not to be true. But even if you lost 3 days, and only 3 days, people understand how infectious Ebola is. Like you save so much money and so many lives by getting it right away. It costs so much more to be slow and let it spread and then try to come in and contain it.
Yeah. And, with any one of these things, it's like, well, maybe it'll be okay. Maybe it'll get the funding turned back on, or the local health authorities will do an effective job of stopping the spread. Maybe it'll be fine. Maybe the cuts at with the air traffic controller at the FAA, maybe it'll work out.
Like
maybe
that plane yesterday, they missed each other. That's fine.
Yeah, it works out.
Yeah.
No harm, no foul, right? It's all good. I don't know what you libs are panicking about. Maybe the Social Security Administration will be able to cut all the checks on time and with accuracy with half the staff. But nobody's case will get denied because they didn't have access to an office. But sure, right, yeah, or maybe just not that many, so we don't really care all that much. Or
we won't
maybe
hear about them probably.
Yeah, and maybe they'll do a good enough job of predicting hurricanes and tornadoes and whatever that it doesn't cause an immediate catastrophic loss of life. But that's a lot of ifs, and you're spreading them across the entire government. Food safety, like all of these things. Yay, Emily, hi.
Hey, guys. Hi, everyone.
Just in time, actually. We have one more story, and then we're getting to Epstein and Tate. So you're right on schedule.
Perfect.
But, when you're talking about all of these risks and cuts compounded across the federal government, I think David Dayen made this point, like, you are taking responsibility for every catastrophe that's going to unfold.
Stupid.
And even in the best of circumstances, there are going to be catastrophes, even when things are running at full tilt and at its most efficient. And, God forbid we have another pandemic. Oh, they had to quickly scramble to rehire the people who were monitoring the bird flu spread. They had to quickly rehire the dude who was like watching over nuclear safety. Yeah. How many other stories like that are there across government that we don't even know about?
The attack on, and Emily and I have talked about this, the attack on the FAA and the air traffic controllers is the one that is probably just politically the stupidest, because you then own every plane crash after that, even if you had nothing to do with it. I was talking to an air traffic controller yesterday who said that while so far air traffic controllers themselves have not been affected, like have not been fired, even the ones that are probationary, he said he's lost most of his support staff and contractors that were assisting them. So before, they'd have people helping with their scheduling, helping order equipment that you need to make sure that all of your stuff continues to work, and all the other kind of technical support that goes on in the background. So they got rid of all of them. And so now it's just the air traffic controllers. And so Elon Musk is like, well, hey, look, we didn't fire the air traffic controllers, so it's not our fault if there's a plane crash. But now you have the air traffic controllers trying to fix the equipment and ordering the parts for the equipment and scheduling their own travel and doing all the things that they used to have help doing. So while they're doing that, what are they not doing?
Yeah. Well, you could think about it in the context of this show. If all the support staff of this show was fired, the show would suck.
It's like, what? We didn't fire Krystal. What are you complaining about?
Yeah, right. It would not be a good show. It would not go off well. It wouldn't go out on time. I don't even know how to post the show.
Every day it would be right here in our basements.
That's
yes.
It would be on TikTok. You guys would just move the show to TikTok.
That's true. That's true.
And what are you complaining about? Yeah, you still get it. So.
Okay, this is actually a good transition to this story that I've been following closely, and actually that I posted a TikTok about. Thank you, Emily, for that ability to tout. And I'm over 10,000 followers now, which is a big milestone, so I can apply for the TikTok Creators Fund. Very exciting stuff.
Huge.
Brian's helping me with that. But in any case, it sure looks like Elon Musk is just stealing this $2.4 billion contract that had been previously awarded to Verizon over at the FAA. So he's, his operatives there are taking it for Starlink. And the way all of this went down is, you had that horrific crash. Elon had been putting pressure on the FAA administrator even before Trump was inaugurated they've been going forward with these cuts at the FAA. They sent over some SpaceX engineers to look around and see what's going on, see if they can make it safer, et cetera. And those people just came in effectively and were like, oh, this $2.4 billion contract you were going to give to Verizon, we're not doing that anymore. Now we're giving it to Starlink. Again, this is illegal because there's a whole contract process that has to play out. You have to have competitive bids, which I think is something that everyone would kind of intuitively understand, that you don't want to just give out contracts to whoever is favored status. Obviously, the FAA, you want to make sure things are done in like the best possible way. I have no idea if Verizon is, doing a fantastic job and doing an amazing job or whatever. But the fact of the richest man on the planet sending his operatives in there and just like taking this contract for himself, one more very brazen instance of the complete self-dealing and corruption and conflicts of interest just inherent in all of this. Not to mention, the FAA was also investigating SpaceX for a launch that went wrong where the rocket came apart. A dozen commercial flights had to be diverted. And so this was a big deal. Something tells me that investigation is not going to be going forward in the same way. And there was some reporting suggests that, that investigation of SpaceX and others and other investigations of Tesla were part of the motivating factor for Elon Musk to get involved in Trump's campaign and in DOGE as he ultimately has.
Well, can I just say, I was just going to say quickly, Ryan, like, we don't know. This is one of the things that really bothers me. And honestly, it should bother Elon. Obviously it doesn't, but it should, because you'll never know. Like, I actually think some of his bids probably are extremely competitive. Some of his products are extremely compelling. Mm-hmm. Some of what he does is extremely compelling, but this actually is like the kind of thing that we're never going to know sometimes. Like this one, the reporting has been really good on it, but there are going to be contracts awarded that we don't know probably until like 5 years down the road that there was wheeling and dealing behind the scenes. And like, it makes you less competitive when you just know you're going to get the bid. It makes your product suck more when you know that you can just rely on getting the government contract because you're the one giving the government contracts. Like, it's actually not good for anybody. Like, it's self-dealing, of course, and like that's corrupt and gross. But in this case, there's probably a good case to be made that he really did have a more competitive, better bid, but it doesn't. That trajectory historically doesn't continue because when it gets less competitive, your product gets less good.
Yeah, because there was no competitive. There was no bid. There was just him taking the contract. Right. And the officials at the FAA actually have refused to sign off on it under pressure. I don't know if they have yet or not. So they're having to like elevate it to the Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy. But they, this contract was years in the making with Verizon. Apparently next month was when they were supposed to sign off on the final thing. And Elon tweeted something negative about this Verizon situation. And lo and behold, his DOGE guys are just like, yep, we're going to take it.
Right.
So, and what complicates this is that a source of mine who's involved in this area said that the company that's losing it, which is called L3 Harris, mm-hmm. They were losing the bid to Verizon. Mm-hmm. Like, they got in and started weaponizing the presence of SpaceX and Elon Musk, and like they helped to kind of foment this story. Like that's what he was saying. So it's like so now you're going to have two contractors, fighting over a project, and because Musk has these obvious conflicts of interest, the one who loses is going to, throw Musk up and be like, actually, look, Musk is trying to come in and steal this thing, because L3's goal is to just reset the entire thing and go back to the status quo of them having the contract. And so that's another way, if there's any truth to that, like that's another way that taxpayers and American citizens lose by having a guy conflicted out the wazoo right in the center of this and talking openly about how SpaceX is great and should do, because it looks so bad, then they go, oh, you know what, forget it. Forget Verizon, forget SpaceX, just keep it how it is. With, and there's reasons to move away from L3. Like, I mean, they're not that efficient and they're ripping off the government, but they then got to play the corruption to their own corrupt advantage. So it's just a giant mess and not how anybody should want a government to run.
Correct. Yes.
And also illegal. Like a DOJ source was pointing out to me yesterday that there are criminal conflict of interest statutes. Like if you take action as a government employee, any government employee, including a special government employee like Musk, for the benefit of your own personal financial interests, there are actually criminal statutes involved. Obviously, nobody at DOJ is going to prosecute that now, but it's not as if it just goes away immediately.
Right. And maybe Musk doesn't have to worry because he can get a pardon from the government, from Trump. But,
That's true.
You know, is every underling who's executing his orders, are they all going to get a pardon? Are they all going to, are they going to get thrown onto the bus at some point? Oh, I had nothing to do with it. It was, Big Balls who was really running the show.
Well, the thing is with
Ball's
him,
going
he doesn't.
down, no doubt about it.
With him, the thing is, though, maybe there were people in the White House who didn't know that Anita Dunn, for example, had interests in TikTok or whatever she had her many interests in. But with Elon Musk, he doesn't actually need to give anybody direct orders because everybody knows Elon Musk favors SpaceX or favors Starlink or favors Tesla. Yeah, you don't have to have Elon Musk being go screw with Rivian. It's people kind of know where he's coming from.
Yeah, which is also, by the way, something that has happened. They did go and screw with some Rivian thing that was happening in Georgia. All right. So let's go ahead and move on to the much anticipated Epstein portion that we wanted to get Emily in on, in particular, because this has become quite a drama over on the MAGA side of things. So they've been teasing, we're going to release the Epstein files, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I've been skeptical because Trump was buddies with Epstein for a long time and shows up in the Epstein flight logs and whatever. So I was like, I don't think y'all are going to get what you really want. Not to mention a bunch of Epstein stuff has already been made public in the past. So they hold this big photo op. You can see, a bunch of these right-wing influencers here with is that DC Drano in the
that's DC Drano, Libs of TikTok. Libs of TikTok, Mike Cernovich, and Liz Wheeler. I like Liz Wheeler, by the way, but Cernovich
your
is
entire For You tab.
in the flesh. For you, in the flesh.
So they've got these binders that says the Epstein Files Phase 1. They're so excited. They're doing their photo op outside of the White House. They start going live and flipping through the binder to see what they find. And lo and behold, not a whole hell of a lot. So let me actually pull up this video of flipping through the binder because it is pretty funny. A lot of redactions and a lot of just things that already were publicly available. So you can see here.
At that point, I'm at
the scrolling through, of the redactions. And apparently someone was saying this is something that Gawker had previously published, but actually with fewer, it didn't have the redactions.
Yeah, in 2015.
2015. So this is information that's been available for a decade. And just the way of doing it too, inviting in the most online people in the entire world, these right-wing influencers, to do their little photo op. It didn't land well with a lot of people, Emily.
It didn't land well with people on the right. It didn't land well with other conservative influencers, let alone genuine conservative journalists who were furious that they have been reporting out these stories with some degree of seriousness for a long time. And then there's all kinds of speculation about whether this was intentionally a photo op or whether it was just the people waiting for Keir Starmer. But you can see some of them are literally posing with the binders. So turning it into an influencer circus was really offensive to some people on the right who were just absolutely furious. And I mean, I share obviously your skepticism on this, Krystal. Maybe we'll get a little bit more information on some of this, but I think what's going on, and this is how it unfolded yesterday. They say that Pam Bondi and Kash Patel were being undermined by the Southern District of New York, which was supposed to hand over new Epstein records, and at the last minute did not. They were supposed to give Pam Bondi and Kash Patel more information that was going to be released, and they didn't do it. So what's interesting about this cope is that they didn't present it to the influencers this way. If they knew, if the DOJ knew that this is what was happening, that they didn't have really any bombshells, they didn't have any good information, whatever, That is not how they presented it to the public. They presented it like, we are doing a public service. Thank you so much, Pam Bondi. We saw some of them saying, for releasing this, making sure we're on top of this. It was a cover your ass story. I'm sure there's truth to the fact that the FBI doesn't want to give all of these records, but it's a cover your ass story to say after the fact, after this lands like a lead balloon, because you take a story that's really serious to MAGA, and you can hate MAGA people as much as you want, but there's genuine concern about Epstein in MAGA world, and that might sound silly given the Trump and Epstein friendship, but that is real. Like, people are genuinely, they care about the Epstein stuff. Like Sound of Freedom, the story about child trafficking, was huge in MAGA world, and in the sort of on the right more broadly. It's a serious issue. So after it lands like a lead balloon, then we start seeing this cope from the DOJ saying, that it's being thwarted by the Southern District of New York. And all of this, my broad theory is that all of this is to lay the groundwork and condition the people in their camp to not expect much. Like, this is not, they're not, they'll be able to just like continue blaming the deep state, essentially.
Well, Trump had always, he'd get asked about this periodically. First of all, he got asked about what, when Ghislaine Maxwell was on trial or whatever, like, oh, what do you think about it?
I wish her well.
I wish her well. He's gotten asked multiple times about releasing the Epstein files, and he always demurs. It would be like, yes, JFK, yes, RFK, like, yes, UFOs. Epstein, well, there might be some personal details there. We'll have to be careful. Change the subject.
Yeah, that was his famous interview with Rachel Campostuffy on Fox News, where he did that. Yes.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and to your point about the influencers and the way that they approached this, they apparently all were on, like, coordinated talking points here. Here's DC Drano. Today I met with President Trump, VP J.D. Vance, Pam Bondi, Kash Patel in the Oval Office. They handed me a binder copy of the Epstein files. This is the most transparent administration in American history. The best part, this is just the start. AG Bondi confirmed there are thousands more Epstein file documents being secretly held, blah, blah, blah. And then, oh, look at this. Today I met with blah, blah, blah. They handed me a binder copy. The most transparent administration in American history. The best part, this is just the start. It's like, okay, you couldn't even come up with your own like lame tweet language to be willing, useful idiots in this photo stunt. That's pretty embarrassing, Ryan.
And at first I was thinking, I don't blame the White House for this, because the White House's job is propaganda, and the propagandist's job is to make it look not like propaganda. You gotta like take the material and you rephrase it. But I do blame the White House because they wrote it in this like cutesy, the best part, the best is yet to come, or whatever. Which
the Kimberly Guilfoyle, the best.
Begs for the propagandist to just, the best is yet to come. And she's partying it up in Greece. She was right.
Yeah.
So it just begs the propagandist to just copy and paste it, and so they did. And then they get caught. Morons.
Well, the White House blames the DOJ. Basically, this has been an absolute, like, from what
Laura Loomer's been on a tear.
Yeah, Laura Loomer's been on a tear.
Let her cook.
Well, so the House Judiciary Committee tweeted a Rickroll about the Epstein files yesterday, seeming like a literal Rickroll, seeming to be blaming or like making a joke about the deep state thwarting the release efforts. And people were furious, saying this is not funny, like there's nothing to be joking about here. And so all of this this is probably the earliest like real infighting that I have. Like, there's always small infighting, but what this did inside the administration, that you have so many different fingers pointing in so many different directions, and people are furious because it destroyed certain relationships with influencers that are now really furious. It's been an absolute dumpster fire of 24 hours just because of the stunt. And so this is a very early, like when books are written, this blow up, I think, will be a really consequential moment in the second administration, just because of what it did to different relationships.
That is interesting.
The guy was killed on Trump's watch. Like, Trump's not giving you this information. Like,
Yeah.
Good point.
Let me just save you the suspense.
Good point. And this is Laura Loomer. We reference to all the social media influencers who were at the White House. How come you are running cover for pedophiles? Every single one of you has chosen to not share the files with the public. Why are you protecting pedophiles? How come you haven't posted the screenshots of the documents? The reason is because there wasn't. Eventually, they did show, like I showed you that video of them flipping through. The reason they weren't sharing them is because there wasn't much really there. But certainly they got, used for this propaganda effort, and she continued to go after them, as many other people did as well. I mean, listen, I can't help but notice, of course, the buck never stops with Trump, right?
Yeah.
It's the deep state. It's Pam Bondi's fault. It's Kash Patel's fault. It's the SDNY. It's this, is that. It's never Donald Trump, who Jeffrey Epstein claims was his best buddy for 10 years.
Right. Who was president when he was killed.
Who was president when he died.
When he unalive. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think all of this document dump promises that, I think like, if some of these documents are dumped, it'll be wonderful. And it's great that he's making the promises. But I think a lot of this is conditioning people to have their expectations lowered in a way that's helpful for the Trump administration. I actually reached out to the CIA over the last week asking about Section 3 of the JFK release EO, which, like Jefferson Morley and other people have said, could allow the CIA director to just keep some records sealed. There are loopholes actually that could be potentially exploited, and the CIA gave me a complete non-answer about how they're cooperating and blah 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 to some very specific questions. So I think what we're going to see is some stuff is going to come out, but it's definitely not going to be like it'll be substantial. I shouldn't say non-substantial, but it won't be everything, and it probably won't even be that close to everything. And I think that there's a recognition of that, and people are trying to sort of lay the groundwork.
Also, one other point on Epstein, and let me share something here. This is a tweet of mine from years ago that still gets shared every now and then. I think asking for the list and all that stuff is fine, but here is the thing that people really should want to know about. So this is July 8th, 2019. I just dug this up. So according to the FBI, they found CDs in Jeffrey Epstein's safe that were labeled, quote, young, then a name, plus name. So they found all of these CDs with the name of a young person and presumably the name of somebody that Epstein cared enough to write their name on the CD. They took, you can read this file here. They took these out with them. This is what we need. Like,
right.
Whose names are in between these brackets?
Well, and one other thing that we need too is, I mean, there are a lot of indications that he was basically working for Israeli intelligence.
Yeah. Right.
Like,
oh yeah,
and which is another reason to be skeptical that this administration would
and maybe
be
also
interested
Russia and maybe also us. Like, yeah,
in releasing that sort of information.
Yep.
So you really think that the guy that Miriam Adelson gave $100 million to is interested in completely exposing what was going on here? I'm going to be pretty doubtful on that particular front. And then, this also ties in with this story about Andrew and Tristan Tate, who are accused of rape and sex trafficking. Very Epstein style. They had their own alleged flavor to it, but Epstein-esque type behavior. And it looks like the Trump administration intervened to get them released and allowed to travel from Romania. They traveled to the U.S. Rick Grenell was reportedly, directly involved here. By the way, the White House denies this. Trump says, I don't even know what you're talking about. I'll let you make your own decisions about what happened here. Apparently, Andrew had claimed that he was in touch with Barron. Barron is supposedly a fan, and Barron also involved in, some of the manosphere outreach, reportedly, of the Trump campaign going on all the Broe podcast. And Emily, there was, significant amount of pushback from the right on this as well. Again, not directly against Trump, but this ties in with some the backlash over the Ashley St. Clair Elon Musk relationship, and a lot of, more sort of like traditional family conservative type conservatives saying like, what the hell are we embracing here? Like, what is going on?
Yeah, here, let me share this post. This is, once again, Laura Loomer, but Candace Owens and others are on this too. After news broke this morning that the Trump admin helped the Tate brothers leave Romania and come back to the U.S. today, Governor Ron DeSantis said they are not welcome in Florida. The Tate brothers are U.S. citizens. Good thing Ron isn't president. And Candace Owens has also been out saying, the charges against them, like I think she criticized Megyn Kelly and said something like, if the charges against them are not, if you look at the charges, they're actually like all cooked up, blah, 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 like they're not that serious. And Megyn Kelly, Josh Hawley, and others have been like, and Ron DeSantis is a good example. Ron DeSantis actually leaning into this to me after the Byron Donalds dust up between Byron Donalds potentially getting into the governor's race with Trump's endorsement, when Casey DeSantis wants to get into the governor's race. Like, looks to me like he is using the Tate brothers actually as an interesting wedge issue, understanding to the point you just made, Krystal, that this could be, to the extent that there's something that could be a crack in the Trump MAGA foundation, that like actually exploiting like something like this, like trafficking, documents not getting released, like Ron DeSantis could see that as like his lane to outmaneuver Trump. I don't think it'll work, but you can sort of see where they are maybe leaning into some of these issues. Now, I don't think Josh Hawley is going to lean into it, but he condemned the decision. Yeah, that's on the screen right now.
Yeah, here's what he said. He said, I would hope our government wasn't involved in any way. My view is that charges against him are very serious. I don't think conservatives should be glorifying this guy at all. I certainly don't think we should be using any influence in our government to try to get him out of what seem to be extremely serious charges in Romania. So I'd hope that we weren't involved in any way. I mean, listen, I'm not an expert on this case. From what I've seen of Andrew Tate's own words, there's quite a lot of fire where there's smoke. But even if you think the charges are bullshit and unfair and it's, a witch hunt or whatever, like just the things that he has himself acknowledged and admitted to doesn't seem like the type of stuff that a traditional conservative would want to embrace, celebrate, have the president's administration go out on a limb to exert diplomatic pressure to try to free these guys. Like that is, if you went back to the pre-Trump era and you told me that any of this was happening, I would think it was absolutely preposterously insane.
Yeah, and I think it was, there's videos of him like beating women with a stick. Like that's out there over the years. Yeah, there's all sorts of, even though he hasn't been convicted. To your point, these are not the kind of values that we were told the party represented.
Yeah, he ran an MLM like scam university to separate vulnerable young men from their cash, teaching them how to run webcam businesses. Like that's
Candace Owens, has she ever heard a Me Too allegation? That she's been like,
that
all
she
right.
didn't. This one, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think also it's sort of laughable. Their claim to only care about the case because it represents like a weaponization of government, I think is also very obviously a pretense. Like that's what they're claiming Josh Hawley is concerned about, right? Like these charges are just a pretense because they really don't like Andrew Tate. He's super anti-establishment, wants to bring down the world order or whatever. But that I think it's a pretense really with the people like Laura Loomer who actually are using the allegedly weaponized charges in order to really express solidarity with Andrew Tate overall, not just on the like charges. They see him as extraordinarily popular, and his popularity with young men is really real. And I think it's real for reasons we could get into that have to do with the failure of the sort of cultural establishment and all of that. But I think they realize these are coattails that they can ride to more popularity, and there's this kind of convenient excuse or this convenient pretense about weaponized charges. So I don't think I think they're being cynical, obviously, as well on that front.
Shapiro says America does not need more self-proclaimed pimps and terror supporters with outstanding criminal allegations of sex trafficking and a history of pornographic distribution, plus a grift university that suckers young men out of thousands of dollars, echoing some of what I was saying about his like MLM scam. that he ran on all of these young men. I guess I sort of felt like his popularity had like waned a bit. Is he still like at the height of his power? I don't know.
I don't think at the height. I feel like he was really before this. I mean, I think this did actually genuinely hurt his reputation a bit to the extent that that's possible. I don't think he's at the height of his power. I think that's probably true.
Yeah, which is, I mean, that's also probably part of why you see a DeSantis and a Josh Hawley and whoever feeling like they have the political bandwidth to say these types of things about him and be as explicit as they've been.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was, he's always like had, I remember when I was at the Federalist, we would have a lot of debates like just internally about Andrew Tate, and it was mostly like the younger conservatives who would say, he's not a great guy, but this is not just at Federalist, but like he's interesting and he's saying things other people won't. And kind of older conservatives were like, who cares? Like it doesn't matter. Like he's awful. He's clearly awful. There's no reason for people to be listening to him just because he's entertaining and says things that other people won't. You can do that without also being an awful person. And so there's always been this. He's actually created an interesting divide, but it hasn't been fully teased out yet because he was kind of off in Romania doing his thing. So maybe this forces the issue more.
Ryan, last thing to you, the other thing that both the Epstein and the Tate stories underscore is just how insanely online this administration is. Mm-hmm. Like, some of the, I mean, for my job, for our jobs, we have to be insanely online, right? The amount of Twitter time I spend in a day is grotesque and not healthy. Some of these people I had never even heard of these people. I'm like, how are you more online than I am? Mm-hmm. How is that possible, right? And yet, they're pulling these random influencers out of wherever they're coming from and inviting them to the White House. I'm just like, holy shit, this is crazy. And I think, partly they feel like that approach of being super online paid off for them in the election. But I also think there is a real danger here because, if they're more online than I am, they're certainly more online and out of touch with like just normie Americans than they should be.
It's like Elizabeth Warren saying Latinx at the first 2020 debate. It's just the reverse of it.
And it feels like they're almost taunting Democrats. They're like, what's the most ridiculously unpopular thing we can do and still stay in power? They're like the Harlem Globetrotters playing, and they think of the Democrats as the Washington Generals. Like they can do the most flamboyantly like absurd stuff on the court and still win against the Washington Generals / Democrats. We're like, we're just gonna bring the sex trafficker and his brother in. How do you like that? And we're gonna be.
What are you gonna do about it?
We're not gonna like look the other way. We're gonna like actively like do it and be like embrace it.
Yeah. Be like, we did that. Actually, the Epstein thing, I was thinking like, Ryan, if you and I had planned it as a way to like subvert the Trump administration, I don't know if we could have done a better job.
Right. And they're still going to beating the Washington Generals
and blowing up their media ecosystem and whatever. And yes, they are still, the Washington Generals are still like, putting up Alyssa Slotkin.
Bill Clinton. Yeah.
That's their response to the State of the Union. All right, guys. Well, on that note, we'll leave it there for today. Ryan and Emily, thank you guys as always. Guys, make sure you check out Ryan's interview with Rohit Chopra. Really, very newsy and very significant conversation. Help people to understand what was actually going on at the CFPB and why this agency was significant. And I guess theoretically still could be sometime in the future, but certainly not now. Have a great weekend, and we will see you guys back here next week.